Between 1347 and 1353, a disease killed somewhere between 30 and 60% of everyone in Europe, which makes the next sentence hard to explain. Millions of the people who survived came out of it richer than they had ever been. Why did England pass a law making it a crime to pay a worker too much? How did an orphan who buried his parents and two siblings in a single year die holding one of the largest private fortunes in Italy? And why, years after the disease burned out, were laborers being branded on the forehead with a hot iron? Not for theft, not for murder, for taking a raise. Hold on to that image. Because to answer any of this, you have to look at what the plague actually destroyed, and more importantly, what it didn't. The obvious answer is that the Black Death destroyed Europe's economy. That's the version everyone carries around. And it's half wrong. The plague destroyed people. It touched nothing else. The gold didn't get sick. The land didn't burn. The houses, the mills, the tools, the coin in every strongbox, all of it was still there in 1354. The continent's wealth survived almost intact. Its owners didn't. And when half the people die and none of the money does, you don't get poverty. You get something much stranger. The largest forced transfer of wealth in recorded history. Nobody planned it. Nobody signed anything. The math simply did it on its own. Run the numbers. If population falls by 40% while the stock of land, buildings, and coin stays roughly the same, every survivor's share of everything nearly doubles overnight. That's not a metaphor. That is what the surviving records show, everywhere the plague went. And you can watch it begin in a single city, Florence, the worst months of 1348. The first people in Europe to reprice their labor were the ones nobody else would replace, corpse carriers. In Florence, they called themselves the bacchini, rough men from the hills who hauled the dead out of houses for hire because no one else would go near the bodies. They charged whatever they wanted. Families paid it. Chroniclers of the outbreak recorded grave diggers growing rich, caretakers for the sick demanding 1 to 3 gold florins a day, plus expenses, a pound of sugar selling for up to 8 florins, a single egg for up to 24 denarii, if you could find one at all. The most despised job in the city had quietly become one of the best paid. That was the signal. In a world suddenly short of hands, the price of hands was about to go somewhere it had never been. Because the plague didn't break one price. It broke 3. Follow each of them, and the whole event stops looking like a disaster, and starts looking like a repricing. The first price was labor. In 1348, the Earl of Stafford, one of the great landowners of England, was paying his farm laborers 1 penny a day. By 1350, he was forced up to 2. Landowners nearby were paying 3. The price of a day's work had tripled in 2 years, and workers were walking off manors their families had been tied to for generations, heading wherever the pay was better. The English crown responded the way owners of a suddenly expensive resource usually do. It tried to fix the price. The Ordinance of Laborers in 1349, then the Statute of Laborers in 1351, wages frozen at pre-plague levels. Everyone under 60 required to work, fines for the worker who took more, and fines for the employer who paid it. Stocks were ordered built in every town. In 1360, the penalties hardened. Imprisonment. Runaway laborers declared outlaws. And if caught, branded on the forehead with the letter F. That's the image from the start of this story. A price control, burned into skin. It failed. Court records from the 1350s show reapers collecting 6 pence a day against a legal cap of 2 or 3. The employers were breaking the law right alongside them, because a field left unharvested cost far more than any fine. Parliament itself admitted workers were getting double and triple the old rates, and over the following century, the real wages of English laborers roughly doubled. Economic historians would later call that period the golden age of the English laborer. The law couldn't beat the shortage, but it could build resentment, and it did, for 30 years. In 1381, English peasants and laborers rose in the largest revolt the country had ever seen and marched on London. Among their named grievances was the Statute of Laborers itself. The men the law had tried to brand came to deliver a message. The old price of a human being was never coming back, and while the price of labor was climbing, everything else was heading the other way. The second price was everything the dead left behind. As labor got expensive, assets got cheap. Land lost tenants. Rents fell. Houses stood empty and sold for whatever anyone would pay. In England, peasants with a little money bought up the fields and homes of dead neighbors at a discount and became a new class of small landowners, farming holdings their grandfathers could never have touched. At the top, the effect was brutal. In the aftermath of the plague, the richest 10% of Europeans lost their grip on roughly 15 to 20% of all wealth. In 7 centuries of European records, inequality has collapsed like that only twice. The second time took 2 world wars. The first took a flea. If you want to see what that new world made possible, follow one boy from a small Tuscan town. Francesco Dattini was around 13 years old in 1348, the son of a tavern keeper in Prato. That year, the plague took his father, his mother, a brother, a sister. A neighbor took him in. At 15, he left for Avignon, the seat of the papal court, with almost nothing. He started by selling armor in the middle of a war market, then cloth, then salt, dyes, jewels, art, practically anything with a margin. In 1383, he organized his companies into something Europe hadn't quite seen before, a network of separate partnerships under one owner, a holding company, 500 years early, with branches in Avignon, Florence, Pisa, Genoa, Barcelona, Valencia, and Majorca. He sold insurance. He opened a bank. And here's the part that matters for this story. The world Dattini got rich in was built by the same disease that orphaned him. Half the competition was dead. Ordinary people had money in their pockets for the first time, because wages had doubled, and they spent it on exactly the goods he moved. When he died in 1410 with no heirs, he left his entire fortune to the poor of Prato. It was valued at over 100,000 gold florins. A tavern keeper's orphan, buried richer than most of the nobles whose fathers had owned the century he was born into, which leaves the third price. And this one was new. Nobody had ever charged it before. The price of time. By the 1370s, every trading city in Europe faced the same impossible choice. The plague kept returning, and it traveled by ship. Close your port, and you starve. Open it, and you die. In 1377, the merchant Republic of Ragusa, modern Dubrovnik, found the third option. It didn't ban trade. It priced a delay into it. By order of the city's Great Council, anyone arriving from an infected region had to wait 30 days on the rocky islet of Mercan, or in the nearby town of Cavtat, before entering the city. The rule was called the Trentino, 30 days. When the wait was later stretched to 40, it took the name that survived, Quarantina, quarantine. Understand what that actually was. Ragusa's counselors were detaining people who looked perfectly healthy, which means they had grasped that a disease could hide inside a body before showing itself, roughly 5 centuries before germ theory could explain why. But it was also, bluntly, a commercial decision. The Trentino was a mechanism for keeping a port's cash flow alive during a pandemic. Goods still arrived, merchants still paid. The city accepted 30 days of interest, spoilage, and waiting as the cost of staying both open and alive. Other Mediterranean ports copied it within decades. The plague had forced Europe to invent risk management for biology, and it came out of a treasury as much as a hospital. So put the 3 prices back together. Labor up, roughly doubled, and stubbornly staying there. Assets down, sliding out of the hands of the old rich and into the hands of surviving commoners. And a new price on risk itself, invented by merchants who refused to choose between trade and survival. That is the actual economics of the Black Death. The disease didn't destroy Europe's wealth. It destroyed the people holding it, and then repriced everything they left behind, in favor of anyone still standing. And it lasted. In much of Europe, population didn't climb back to its old level for more than a century and a half. The shortage held, and wages held with it. Generations of laborers lived and died inside that window without ever knowing how rare it was. Some historians go further and argue that a continent where human labor stayed expensive had a permanent new incentive to replace it, with better ships, better mills, and eventually machines. That argument is still fought over. What isn't fought over is the shape of the event itself. For all of recorded history before 1347, the one thing Europe never ran out of was people. Land was scarce, coin was scarce. People were the cheap part, and every institution on the continent was built on that assumption, from serfdom on up. The plague broke the assumption in 5 years. The scarcest asset in Europe was suddenly a living pair of hands. And every law, revolt, fortune, and invention in this story is just someone reacting to that single fact. The Black Death was the worst thing that ever happened to the people of Europe. It was also, for the ones left standing, the largest raise in human history, paid out to survivors only. Half a continent never collected.